The evening air carried a hint of autumn as Sofia Mendez hurried down the busy street toward Bellini's. Street lamps flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. She checked her watch and quickened her pace. 6 minutes until her shift started. 6 minutes to transform from an exhausted music lover into the perfect waitress. Sofia pushed through the staff entrance of Bellini's, the heavy door closing behind her with a soft thud. The kitchen buzzed with the familiar sounds of preparation. Knives chopping, pots simmering, Chef Angelo barking orders in his thick Italian accent. She slipped into the small back room, quickly changing into her crisp white shirt and black pants, the uniform that made her blend in with every other server. As she tied her dark hair back into a neat bun, she caught her reflection in the small spotted mirror. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed the late night she'd spent at her piano. "You're cutting it close," said Lena, the hostess, as Sofia emerged from the back room. Lena's perfectly applied lipstick formed a knowing smirk. "Late night again?" Sofia nodded, fastening her name tag. "Lost track of time? Playing that piano of yours until the neighbors complained?" Lena teased, straightening menus at her station. "They've stopped complaining. I think Mrs. Wu upstairs actually likes it now. She leaves cookies by my door sometimes." Lena laughed. "Well, Mr. Donato doesn't pay you to play piano. Table 7 is yours tonight, the corner table. And heads up, the Henderson party reserved the private room. You know how they tip." Sofia did know. The Hendersons were regulars, old money with particular tastes and expectations. They tipped well when pleased and not at all when disappointed. With rent due in a week, Sofia couldn't afford a bad night. The restaurant filled quickly as the evening progressed. Sofia moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing plates along her arm, remembering preferences without asking. "The Pinot Noir for you, sir." "And yes, we did add extra garlic to your pasta." "Just how you like it." A smile, a nod, an invisible presence making the evening smoother for those who barely looked at her face. When the Henderson party arrived, Sofia watched from across the room. Women in designer dresses that cost more than her monthly rent, men in tailored suits all laughing loudly, secure in their place in the world. Among them was an older gentleman she hadn't seen before, his silver hair contrasting with a deep blue suit. He seemed quieter than the others, observing rather than participating in their boisterous conversations. "That's Richard Blackwood," whispered Lena as she passed. "The composer. Writes music for films." Sofia's heart skipped. Richard Blackwood. She'd studied his compositions in school, marveled at his ability to convey emotion through seemingly simple arrangements, and now he sat 20 feet away, absently stirring his drink while the others around him compared vacation homes. Throughout the evening, Sofia stole glances at Blackwood whenever she passed the private room. Once she thought he caught her looking, but she quickly turned away, focusing on refilling water glasses at another table. She wondered what it would be like to have that kind of success, to spend days creating music instead of memorizing drink orders and appeasing demanding customers. Her shift ended at 11, but it was nearly midnight when Sofia finally left Bellini's. The city had quieted somewhat, though never completely. She unwound her hair from its tight bun, letting it fall around her shoulders as she walked home, the tension in her scalp easing. The night air cleared her head, washing away the smells of garlic and wine that clung to her. Closed out Sofia's apartment building, stood on a street that real estate agents optimistically called up and coming. The elevator had been temporarily out of service for the 8 months she'd lived there, so she climbed the 4 flights of stairs, her legs heavy after hours of standing. As she reached her floor, she saw a small plate outside her door, Mrs. Wu's oatmeal cookies still slightly warm. The studio apartment was small but clean. Sofia had sacrificed space for location, needing to be within walking distance of both Bellini's and her weekend job at the music store. A bed, a small kitchen area, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and dominating the main room, her upright piano, a Yamaha that had seen better days but still held its tune remarkably well. She placed Mrs. Wu's cookies on the counter and changed out of her work clothes, slipping into soft cotton pants and an oversized t-shirt from her community college days. She should sleep. Her morning shift at the music store started at 9, but as always, the piano called to her. Sofia sat on the bench, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing down. This had been her routine since childhood, a moment of connection before the music began. Then she started to play softly at first, mindful of the hour. Debussy's Reverie flowed from her fingers, the gentle melody carrying her away from the cramped apartment, from the ache in her feet, from the mental list of bills to be paid. As she played, Sophia thought about Richard Blackwood sitting in Bellini's private room. Had he always known he would succeed? Or had there been a time when he too had wondered if his dreams would ever come true? The thought of him enjoying a meal she'd served while having no idea of her passion felt like a cruel joke from the universe. The piece ended, and Sophia let her hands rest in her lap. On the small table beside the piano sat a framed photo. Sophia at 17, standing proudly beside her piano teacher, Mr. Abello, after her final recital before college. He had believed in her talent, had helped secure her scholarship to the conservatory. "Music is your gift," he told her. "Don't ever let it go." She hadn't let it go, not really. But life had a way of rearranging priorities. When her father got sick during her second year, the choice hadn't felt like a choice at all. She'd left school to help care for him, to work and pay for medications not covered by insurance. After he passed, returning hadn't seemed possible. The momentum was lost, the scholarship gone. Instead, there were jobs and bills and the gradual acceptance that some dreams remain just that. Dreams. Sophia reached for her music notebook, flipping to her latest composition. Unlike the classical pieces she practiced faithfully, this was wholly hers, a melody that had come to her one morning as she'd watched the sunrise from her small window. She'd been working on it for weeks, adding and adjusting, never quite satisfied. She began to play it, stopping occasionally to scribble notes or changes. This piece felt different from her previous attempts at composition. There was something honest about it, something that spoke of both longing and acceptance. As her fingers found the final chord, Sophia realized she was crying, silent tears tracking down her cheeks and dropping onto her hands. With a deep breath, she closed the piano lid gently. Tomorrow was another day of serving others, of being background noise in lives more privileged than her own. But tonight, for these few precious hours, the music had been for her alone. As she prepared for bed, Sophia noticed a business card that had fallen from her pocket, black with gold lettering. Richard Blackwood, composer. He must have left it on the table. She should have turned it into Lost and Found, but instead, she placed it carefully on top of her piano, a small, forbidden souvenir of a brush with the life she'd once imagined for herself. Outside her window, the city continued its nighttime rhythm, distant sirens, occasional laughter from late-night revelers, the rumble of garbage trucks. Sophia set her alarm, knowing morning would come too soon. As she drifted towards sleep, Debussy's note still echoed in her mind, carrying her away from the reality of unpaid bills and aching feet into dreams where she sat at a grand piano, on a spotlit stage, playing for an audience that finally saw her, really saw her, for who she was meant to be. And somewhere in the building, Mrs. Wu smiled as she fell asleep, the faint notes of Sophia's playing, having once again provided the perfect lullaby to end her day. 3 weeks had passed since Sophia had served Richard Blackwood at Bellini's. His business card still sat on top of her piano, a small reminder of a world just beyond her reach. She'd picked it up countless times, running her thumb over the embossed letters, wondering what would happen if she called the number. But what would she say? "Hello, I'm the waitress who brought your risotto. By the way, I play piano too." The thought alone made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Friday arrived with unexpected chaos. Sophia's alarm failed to go off, leaving her rushing through her morning routine. She spilled coffee on her last clean white shirt and had to scrub furiously at the stain. By the time she reached Bellini's, she was already 10 minutes late. "There you are." Carlo, the restaurant manager, stood by the staff entrance, checking his watch with exaggerated concern. His thinning hair was slicked back more severely than usual, a sure sign he was stressed. "Did you forget what day it is?" Sophia tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear.
"Friday?"
"Not just any Friday." Carlo's accent grew thicker with his agitation. "The Harrington Foundation dinner. 60 of the city's most important people will be here tonight. The mayor is coming, Sophia, the mayor." Now she remembered. The event had been on the calendar for months, a charity fundraiser for arts education. The irony wasn't lost on Sophia as she hurried to her locker. She'd had to drop out of her own arts education, and now she'd be serving drinks to wealthy people congratulating themselves on their generosity. The restaurant had been transformed. White tablecloths covered every surface, elaborate flower arrangements created splashes of color, and tiny lights had been strung across the ceiling, creating the impression of a starlit sky. In the corner where couples usually sat for date nights, a grand piano had been brought in, much nicer than her old upright at home. Antonio Vasquez will be playing during dinner, Carlo explained, following her gaze. He's flying in from Spain. Very exclusive, very expensive. Sophia had heard of Vasquez, a rising star known for his passionate interpretations of classical pieces. She'd watched videos of him performing, studying his technique, dreaming of having that kind of opportunity herself. The day passed in a flurry of preparations. Extra staff had been brought in, special menu items were being practiced in the kitchen, and Carlo kept rushing around straightening things that didn't need straightening. By the time Sophia took her break at 4, she was already exhausted. She sat in the alley behind the restaurant, eating a sandwich and scrolling through her phone. A new email from the bank reminded her that her student loan payment was due next week. Another from her landlord announced a rent increase starting next month. Sophia closed her eyes, leaning her head against the brick wall. Something had to change, but she had no idea what or how. Back inside, the staff gathered for final instructions. Carlo was in rare form, pacing as he spoke. These people can make or break Bellini's reputation. Some of them own restaurants themselves. Many are regular reviewers on food sites. All of them expect perfection. He pointed at each server in turn. Perfect timing. Perfect presentation. Perfect attitude. Understand? Everyone nodded. They had heard variations of this speech before, but tonight it carried extra weight. The guests began arriving at 7. Sophia was stationed in the main dining area, responsible for 3 tables of 10. The women sparkled with jewelry that caught the light from every angle. The men wore watches that cost more than Sophia's annual salary. She moved between them, filling water glasses, taking drink orders, smiling at jokes she'd heard 100 times before. At her third table sat an older woman with silver hair swept into an elegant updo. Unlike the others who barely glanced at Sophia, this woman looked directly at her, thanking her by name when she brought the wine. Sophia recognized her from somewhere but couldn't place her. "Have we met before?" the woman asked as if reading her thoughts. "I don't think so, ma'am. I've worked at Bellini's for 3 years. Perhaps you've seen me here?" The woman tilted her head. "No, that's not it. I rarely come to this part of town." She continued to study Sophia with curious eyes. "No matter. I'm Eleanor Harrington, the Harrington Foundation, the charity dinner's host." Sophia straightened her posture slightly. "It's an honor to serve you tonight, Mrs. Harrington. The event looks wonderful. Please call me Eleanor. And yes, it's coming together nicely, though I'm worried about our entertainment." Before Sophia could respond, Carlo appeared at her elbow, ushering her away to help with a spill at another table. The evening progressed smoothly until just after the appetizers had been served. Sophia was bringing fresh bread to one of her tables when she noticed Carlo in an intense phone conversation by the kitchen door. His face had gone pale and he was gesturing frantically. Moments later, he pulled the serving staff aside. "We have a problem," he hissed. "Antonio Vasquez is stuck at the airport in Madrid. Some kind of weather delay. He won't make it. Can we get another pianist?" asked Lena. Carlo threw his hands up. "On 2 hours' notice? For this crowd? Impossible." Mrs. Harrington specifically requested piano music for the dinner portion of the evening. "This is a disaster." The staff exchanged worried glances. The success of the event reflected on all of them. Poor reviews meant fewer high-profile events, which meant smaller tips and possibly even job cuts. Sophia found herself speaking before she'd fully thought it through. "I could play." Everyone turned to look at her. "You?" Carlo's eyebrows shot up nearly to his hairline. "You play piano?" "I studied at the conservatory for 2 years, Sophia said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Classical training." Carlo stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "Why do I not know this?" "Why are you a waitress if you can play piano?" Sophia shrugged. "Life happened. But I still play every day." Doubt creased Carlo's forehead. "This is not some little recital, Sophia. These people expect professional quality." "Let me try," she urged. "What's the alternative?" Carlo looked around desperately, as if hoping a concert pianist might magically appear among the dessert carts. Finding no other solution, he sighed heavily. "Fine, But if you embarrass Bellini's, you find new job tomorrow, yes? Sophia nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. What had she just volunteered for? You have 20 minutes before the main course is served, Carlo said. That's when the music should start. Go. Prepare, or whatever it is you need to do. Sophia rushed to the bathroom, her hands shaking as she splashed cold water on her face. In the mirror, her reflection looked terrified. She'd never played for a crowd like this, never performed on a grand piano in public. What if she froze? What if her fingers fumbled? What if they laughed? She took a deep breath, then another. You can do this, she whispered to her reflection. You've played these pieces 1,000 times. When she emerged, Carlo handed her a black blazer to wear over her server's uniform. To look more professional, he explained. It was slightly too big, clearly borrowed from one of the male servers, but it helped transform her appearance from waitstaff to performer. Sophia approached the piano, running her fingers lightly across the polished surface. It was a Steinway worth more than everything she owned combined. She sat on the bench adjusting its height, familiarizing herself with the feel of the keys. A few guests glanced curiously in her direction, but most continued their conversations, unaware of the last-minute substitution. As the main courses began to arrive at tables, Carlo nodded at her from across the room. It was time. Sophia placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes for just a moment, and began to play. She started with Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece she often used to warm up at home. The first notes rang out clear and true, filling the room with gentle melody. She kept her focus on the music, not daring to look at the audience. The familiar patterns flowed from her fingers, muscle memory taking over as her initial nerves began to fade. As the piece progressed, she noticed the restaurant growing quieter. Conversations paused. The clink of silverware against plates became less frequent. When she finished the piece, there was a moment of complete silence before applause broke out across the room. Sophia finally looked up, startled by the response. Several guests were watching her with surprised appreciation. At her table, Eleanor Harrington was smiling broadly. Encouraged, Sophia began her next piece, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. As she played, she felt something shifting inside her, as if a door long closed was slowly swinging open. This wasn't her cramped apartment with thin walls and neighbors who sometimes complained. This was a room designed for beautiful sounds, filled with people who had stopped to listen, really listen, to her music. For the first time in years, Sophia Mendez wasn't invisible. She was being seen, not as the person who brought food and cleared plates, but as the artist she had always been. And as her fingers danced across the keys of the magnificent piano, she allowed herself to wonder if perhaps dreams deferred didn't always have to be dreams denied. The Chopin Nocturne came to an end, its final notes lingering in the air of Bellini's dining room. Sophia's hands hovered above the keys for a brief moment before she lowered them to her lap. The applause that followed was warmer this time, with several guests turning in their chairs to get a better look at her. She offered a small, shy smile and a slight nod of acknowledgement. Sophia glanced toward Carlo, who stood near the kitchen entrance. His earlier look of panic had been replaced by wide-eyed surprise. He gave her a thumbs up and mouthed something that looked like, "Keep going." Taking a deep breath, Sophia began Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Her fingers moved deliberately across the keys, drawing out the haunting melody that had always spoken to something deep within her. The piece started softly, almost tentatively, much like her own journey back to music tonight. As she played, Sophia became aware of a server, May, who usually worked weekends, approaching the piano with a glass of water. May placed it on a napkin atop the piano and whispered, "You're amazing," before hurrying back to her duties. The small gesture of support warmed Sophia's heart. The main course was being served now, waiters moving efficiently between tables with plates of expertly prepared food. Sophia had been on the other side so many times, balancing trays and dodging fellow servers in the carefully choreographed dance of high-end service. Tonight she was providing a different kind of service, one she had trained for years ago but never expected to offer at Bellini's. As the first movement of the sonata ended, Sophia seamlessly transitioned into the second. A few guests had paused their eating to watch her play, forks suspended halfway to mouths. At one table, an older gentleman with a silver beard wiped at the corner of his eye with his napkin. The music flowed through her, each note feeling more natural than the last. Sophia closed her eyes, allowing muscle memory and emotion to guide her. The borrowed blazer felt less awkward now, almost like a costume for the role she was playing. Not the waitress pretending to be a pianist, but the pianist who had been pretending to be just a waitress. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed Eleanor Harrington watching her intently. The older woman's gaze was focused, analytical, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. Sophia looked away quickly, focusing instead on a point just above the piano, afraid that making eye contact might somehow break the spell. After finishing the Beethoven piece, Sophia moved into Schubert's Impromptu in G-flat major. It was a more technically challenging piece, one that showcased her years of practice and training. Her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence, the muscle memory from countless hours of playing coming back in full force. The dining room had taken on a different atmosphere now. What had begun as background music for an elegant dinner had become something of a performance. Conversations continued, but in hushed tones with frequent pauses to listen. Servers moved more carefully, as if reluctant to create any noise that might compete with the piano. Halfway through the Schubert piece, Sophia noticed a man approaching the piano. For a moment she feared it was Carlo coming to tell her to stop, that they'd found a real pianist after all. But it wasn't Carlo. It was Richard Blackwood, the composer whose business card still sat on her piano at home. Her heart skipped a beat, but her fingers never faltered. Years of practice had taught her to play through distractions. Blackwood stood at the corner of the piano, listening with his head slightly tilted, eyes closed. A small smile played on his lips as he swayed almost imperceptibly with the music. When Sophia finished the piece, Blackwood opened his eyes and gave her a small, appreciative nod before returning to his table. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it sent a thrill through Sophia's body. Richard Blackwood, whose music she had studied and admired, had listened to her play and approved. The applause after the Schubert was more enthusiastic, with several guests calling out, "Bravo!" Sophia felt a flush of pleasure warm her cheeks. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. For years she had worked to be efficient but invisible, to anticipate needs without being noticed. Now every eye in the room seemed to find its way to her. Carlo appeared at her side with a glass of champagne. "You never told me," he said, his voice a mix of awe and accusation. 3 years and you never said you could play like this." Sophia shrugged. "You never asked." "Mrs. Harrington is very impressed," Carlo continued, nodding toward the silver-haired woman. "She's asking about you." A flutter of nervousness passed through Sophia's stomach. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you are our best server who apparently has been hiding that she is also a concert pianist." Carlo shook his head in disbelief. "Take 5 minutes, drink this, then play something." "I don't know." "Exciting. The dessert is coming soon." Sophia nodded, taking a small sip of the champagne. The bubbles tickled her nose, and the cool liquid soothed her throat, which had gone dry with nerves. From her position at the piano, she could see the entire restaurant, the gleaming silverware, the crystal glasses catching the light, the beautiful people in their expensive clothes. It was a world she served but had never been part of, until tonight. As she set the glass aside and prepared to play again, Sophia noticed Eleanor Harrington walking purposefully toward her. The elegant older woman moved with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention, her silk dress rustling softly as she approached. "My dear," Eleanor said, her voice warm but authoritative, "you play beautifully." "Thank you." "Mrs. Harrington," Sophia replied, suddenly conscious of her borrowed blazer and the server's uniform underneath. "Eleanor, please." The older woman smiled. "Tell me, where did you study?" "Your technique reminds me of the Moscow school." Sophia's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You know about piano techniques?" "I was on the board of the National Conservatory for 20 years, Eleanor explained. "Music has always been my passion, though I lack the talent to perform myself." She gestured to the piano. "So where did you study?" "City Conservatory," Sophia answered. "For 2 years. I had to leave before completing my degree." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "What a waste," she murmured almost to herself. Then, more clearly, "We should talk after your performance. I have some people you should meet." Before Sophia could respond, Eleanor had returned to her table, leaving behind the subtle scent of expensive perfume and the promise of something. Sophia wasn't sure what exactly, but it felt important. Turning back to the piano, Sophia decided to play something different, one of her own compositions. It was a piece she had been working on for months, one that spoke of longing and possibility. She had never played it for anyone before. It had always felt too personal, too revealing. But tonight was about truth, about being seen, and this piece was the truest expression of who she was as a musician. The first notes rang out, hesitant at first, then gaining strength and clarity. Unlike the classical pieces she had played earlier, this music had no history, no famous interpretations for listeners to compare it to. It was simply hers, flowing directly from her heart through her fingers to the keys. Sophia forgot about the wealthy diners, about Carlo watching nervously from the sidelines, about Eleanor Harrington and her mysterious offer. She forgot about being a waitress playing dress-up as a performer. In this moment, she was simply a musician sharing her soul through sound. The piece built slowly like a story unfolding. There were moments of doubt and struggle woven into the melody, passages that spoke of late nights and tired mornings, of dreams deferred but not abandoned, and then it transformed, lifting into something hopeful, something that reached toward the future with open hands. As she played the final notes, Sophia felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. The room had gone completely silent. No clink of silverware, no murmured conversations, not even the sound of footsteps from the servers. For several seconds after the music ended, the silence held, as if no one wanted to be the first to break the spell. Then the applause began. Not polite, restrained appreciation, but genuine enthusiasm. People were standing smiling, some wiping away tears of their own. Sophia stood and gave a small bow, overwhelmed by the response. As she straightened, she caught Eleanor Harrington's eye. The older woman was not clapping. Instead, she was watching Sophia with an expression of deep satisfaction, as if she had discovered something rare and valuable hidden in plain sight. She raised her glass in a silent toast, and Sophia felt for the first time in years that her life was about to change direction. Carlo appeared at her side again, his face flushed with excitement. "They love you," he said, stating the obvious. "Mrs. Harrington wants you to play until the end of the night. Can you do more?" Sophia nodded, her heart full. "I can play all night," she said, and she meant it. After years of keeping her music private, of playing only for herself and the occasional neighbor, the joy of sharing it was intoxicating. As she sat down to begin another piece, Sophia caught sight of her reflection in the polished surface of the piano. She looked different somehow, more alive, more present, more herself than she had been in years. The night was only half over, but already she knew it was one she would never forget. The charity dinner at Bellini's had officially ended nearly an hour ago, but nobody seemed eager to leave. Sophia continued to play as guests lingered over coffee and dessert, their conversations flowing with the music. Her fingers should have been tired by now. She had been playing for almost 3 hours straight, but adrenaline kept her going, a kind of musical high she hadn't experienced since her days at the conservatory. As the crowd finally began to thin, Eleanor Harrington approached the piano again, this time with Richard Blackwood and another man Sophia didn't recognize. He was tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and keen eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Sophia," Eleanor said, "I'd like you to meet Julian Mercer." Sophia's hands froze above the keys. Julian Mercer was the conductor of the City Symphony, a musical legend known for discovering new talent. She stood quickly, nearly knocking over the piano bench in her haste. "It's an honor, Mr. Mercer," she said, extending her hand and then immediately wondering if her palm was sweaty from playing. "The honor is mine," Mercer replied, his handshake firm but brief. "Mrs. Harrington insisted I stay to hear you play. I'm glad I did." Sophia glanced at Eleanor, who was watching the exchange with obvious satisfaction. "Your playing has both technical precision and emotional depth," the older woman explained. "A rare combination, especially in someone who's been away from formal training." "How did you know I'd been away from training?" Sophia asked. "You mentioned you left the conservatory after 2 years," Eleanor reminded her. "Besides, if you'd completed your degree, you wouldn't be serving dinner at Bellini's, would you?" There was no judgment in Eleanor's tone, just simple observation. Still, Sophia felt a flicker of defensiveness. I'm good at my job here. Clearly you're good at more than one thing, Blackwood spoke up. That last piece, was that your own composition? Sophia nodded, surprised and flattered that he had recognized it as original. Yes, something I've been working on. It has potential, Blackwood said in the measured tone of someone who didn't give praise easily. Raw in places, but the core melody is quite moving. Coming from a composer of his stature, even this qualified approval sent a thrill through Sophia. She looked down at her hands, server's hands with short, practical nails and a small burn on one knuckle from a hot plate, and found it hard to believe that tonight was real. Sophia, Eleanor said, reclaiming her attention, Julian is looking for a soloist for next month's charity gala at the Symphony Hall. The pianist who was scheduled had to withdraw due to health issues. Julian nodded. It's a demanding program, Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto. Based on what I heard tonight, you might be able to handle it. Might? Sophia echoed, unsure if she should be offended or flattered. A small smile tugged at the corner of Julian's mouth. I never promise anything until after an audition. Can you come to Symphony Hall tomorrow afternoon? 3 o'clock? Sophia's mind raced. Tomorrow was Saturday. She had a shift at the music store from 9 to 5 and another at Bellini's starting at 6. I have work, she stammered. Carlo, who had been hovering nearby trying to look like he wasn't eavesdropping, suddenly stepped forward. She can come, he declared. I will cover her shift. Carlo, no, I can't ask you to. You did not ask. I offered. The restaurant manager shook his head. Sophia, do you think opportunities like this come every day? Go to the audition. Bellini's will still be here if it doesn't work out. Eleanor smiled approvingly at Carlo before turning back to Sophia. That settles it then. 3 o'clock, Symphony Hall. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. My personal number is on the back. Call me if you have any issues getting in. Before Sophia could respond, the kitchen doors swung open and Angelo, the head chef, emerged, still wearing his white coat. His weathered face split into a wide grin when he saw Sophia at the piano. So it's true, he exclaimed, hurrying over. Little Sophia playing like an angel. Why did you never tell us? Sophia shrugged, feeling suddenly shy under all the attention. It never came up. Angelo laughed loudly. Never came up. For 3 years you and I talk about everything. My mother's recipes, your father's garden, the weather, politics. But you never mention you play piano like a professional. I'm not a professional, Sophia said quietly. Not yet, Julian corrected, his expression serious. But you could be. That's what tomorrow's about. He checked his watch and nodded to Eleanor and Blackwood. I should go. 3 o'clock, Sophia. Don't be late. As the 3 VIP guests departed, leaving generous tips that Carlo immediately brought to Sophia, the restaurant fell into the familiar rhythm of closing time. Servers counted their tips, the kitchen staff cleaned their stations, and the night manager tallied the evening's profits. But everything felt different to Sophia. The air itself seemed charged with possibility. She helped with some of the cleanup, still wearing the borrowed blazer over her uniform. Several of her coworkers stopped to congratulate her or express amazement at her hidden talent. I knew you were holding out on us, Lena teased, nudging Sophia's shoulder as they folded napkins. All those times you hummed while refilling salt shakers. I should have known you were some kind of musical genius. I'm not a genius, Sophia protested. I just love music. Well, your just loving music got you an audition with Julian Mercer, Lena pointed out. That's kind of a big deal. It was a big deal. Such a big deal that Sophia felt almost afraid to acknowledge it, as if speaking about it might make the opportunity disappear like a soap bubble. Instead, she focused on folding napkins into perfect triangles, a task so familiar it was almost meditative. By the time Sophia left Bellini's, it was nearly 2 in the morning. The city streets were quiet, with only the occasional taxi passing by. She walked slowly, her mind replaying the events of the evening. Had it really happened? Had she really played piano for a room full of wealthy strangers who had applauded and praised her? Had Julian Mercer really offered her an audition? The business card in her pocket, Eleanor Harrington's card with her personal number scrawled on the back, seemed to suggest it wasn't a dream. When Sophia reached her apartment building, she climbed the 4 flights of stairs with leaden feet, The adrenaline of the evening finally giving way to exhaustion, she unlocked her door and stepped inside, switching on the light to reveal her small studio apartment. Her upright piano stood against the wall, faithful and familiar. Sophia ran her fingers along its wooden top, thinking about how different it was from the gleaming grand piano at Bellini's. Yet this old Yamaha had been her companion through years of quiet practice, the keeper of her musical dreams when reality had forced her onto a different path. "We might be going somewhere," she whispered to the piano, feeling only a little foolish for talking to an inanimate object. Too wired to sleep despite her tiredness, Sophia sat on the bench and began to play, keeping the volume soft out of consideration for her neighbors. Her fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece Julian had mentioned for the charity gala. It was challenging music, with its rich harmonies and technical demands. Sophia had learned it years ago at the conservatory, but hadn't played it in full since then. Some passages came back easily. Others would need work. She played until her eyes grew heavy and her tempo began to drag with fatigue. Finally, at nearly 4 a.m, Sophia prepared for bed. As she changed out of her uniform, she found a folded napkin in the pocket of the borrowed blazer. Opening it, she discovered a note written in elegant handwriting. "Music gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything. Plato, thank you for reminding us of this truth tonight. Eleanor Harrington." Sophia placed the note carefully on her nightstand. As she drifted toward sleep, her mind kept returning to one thought. After years of serving others, of being part of the background, she had finally been seen. Morning came too quickly. Sophia woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of traffic below. For a moment she lay still, trying to sort dream from reality. Then she saw Eleanor's note on her nightstand and felt a rush of nervous excitement. The audition, today at 3. She called the music store first, explaining that she needed the day off for an unexpected opportunity. Her manager there, a kind older man who had always supported her musical interests, was understanding and even excited for her. "Go show them what you can do," he said. "We've all heard you playing when you think the store is empty." With her work obligations settled, Sophia turned to the more pressing question: what to wear to an audition at Symphony Hall. Her closet held mainly practical clothes for her 2 jobs, with a few casual pieces for her rare days off. Nothing seemed suitable for meeting with the conductor of the city symphony in its hallowed performance space. After trying on and discarding several outfits, Sophia settled on her one good dress, a simple navy blue A-line she had bought for her father's funeral 2 years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it was respectful, and allowed enough freedom of movement for playing. She practiced for several hours, working through the rough spots in the Rachmaninoff piece, then forced herself to eat a light lunch even though her stomach was tied in knots. At 1:30, she left her apartment and took the bus across town to Symphony Hall. The imposing building stood in the cultural district, its classical columns and wide steps projecting an aura of artistic importance. Sophia had passed it many times but had never been inside. Ticket prices for symphony performances were well beyond her budget. She climbed the steps slowly, her heart beating faster with each one. At the top, she paused and took a deep breath, looking back at the city spread out below. Somewhere out there was Bellini's, where just 12 hours ago her life had begun to change. Somewhere was the small music store where she helped customers find sheet music and instruments she could never afford herself. And here she was, about to step into a different world, one she had thought lost to her forever. Sophia squared her shoulders, turned, and walked through the doors of Symphony Hall, ready to reclaim the dream she had reluctantly set aside. 6 months had passed since that night at Bellini's, yet Sophia still thought about it almost every day. That evening had divided her life into before and after, like a clear line drawn across the timeline of her existence. Today, she stood in a small dressing room backstage at Symphony Hall, smoothing down the front of her emerald green evening gown. The dress had been Eleanor's suggestion. "The color will make you stand out against the orchestra, my dear." And Sophia had to admit the older woman had been right. The rich fabric caught the light beautifully and made her feel like someone who belonged on a concert stage. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. 5 minutes. "Ms. Mendez," called a stagehand. "Thank you," Sophia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She closed her eyes and took several deep breaths, trying to quiet the butterflies in her stomach. Tonight was the culmination of 6 months of intense work, rehearsals with the orchestra, private coaching sessions with Julian, hours of practice that had left her fingers cramped and her back aching. There had been moments of doubt, days when she wondered if she had taken on too much too quickly. But there had also been breakthroughs, instances when the music flowed through her so perfectly that time seemed to stop. 6 months ago, she had walked into Symphony Hall as a waitress auditioning for an unlikely opportunity. Tonight she would walk onto its stage as the featured soloist. Another knock, more insistent this time. Sophia opened the door to find Eleanor Harrington standing there, elegant as always in a black gown with a diamond necklace that caught the backstage lights. "Ready?" Eleanor asked, her eyes taking in Sophia's appearance with approval. "As I'll ever be," Sophia replied with a small smile. "The hall is full," Eleanor informed her. "We sold out 2 weeks ago." Sophia's stomach tightened. "No pressure then," Eleanor laughed softly. "You've been ready for this your whole life." "Sophia, everything that happened, leaving the conservatory, working at Bellini's, it was all part of your journey to tonight." Sophia wasn't sure she believed in such tidy narratives of destiny, but she appreciated Eleanor's confidence. Over the past months, the older woman had become something of a mentor to her, opening doors that Sophia hadn't even known existed. "I should warn you," Eleanor continued, "Carlo has brought half the staff from Bellini's. They're all in the 3rd row, looking extremely proud of themselves." Sophia laughed, picturing her former co-workers dressed up for a night at the symphony. "Former staff," she corrected gently. "I haven't worked a shift there in 4 months." It had been a difficult decision to leave Bellini's. Despite the excitement of her new musical opportunities, Sophia had initially tried to keep her waitressing job, working reduced hours around her rehearsal schedule. But as demands on her time increased and Eleanor had arranged a stipend from the Harrington Foundation to support emerging artists, Sophia had finally given her notice. Carlo had organized a farewell party with a cake shaped like a piano. 2 minutes, Ms. Mendez," called the stagehand, passing by again. Eleanor squeezed Sophia's hand. "I'll take my seat." "Remember what Julian always says, trust the music," Sophia finished for her. It was Julian's constant refrain during rehearsals whenever he sensed her growing tense or overthinking a passage. With a final encouraging smile, Eleanor left, and Sophia was alone again. She flexed her fingers and rolled her shoulders, physical rituals to prepare her body for what was to come. From beyond the door she could hear the orchestra tuning, the distinctive sound of many instruments finding harmony together. For most of her life, Sophia had been a solo pianist, playing alone in practice rooms or her apartment. Learning to play with an orchestra had been challenging, finding the balance between standing out as a soloist and blending with the larger musical landscape. Julian had been a demanding teacher but also an insightful one, helping her understand how her part fit into the whole. "Places, Ms. Mendez," said the stagehand, returning a final time. Sophia nodded and followed him through the backstage area to the wings of the main stage. From here she could see the orchestra already seated, the musicians in formal black attire adjusting their sheet music and instruments. The grand piano waited center stage, its polished surface reflecting the stage lights. In the audience beyond, Sophia could make out familiar faces, Eleanor in the front row, Carlo and the Bellini's staff just where Eleanor had said they would be. She spotted Richard Blackwood, who had become something of a mentor as well, helping her refine her own compositions in weekly sessions at his studio. Even Mrs. Wu from her old apartment building was there, dressed in her Sunday best and looking slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of Symphony Hall. The concertmaster stood, and the orchestra fell silent. Then Julian Mercer walked onto the stage, his confident stride and commanding presence drawing immediate applause. He bowed to the audience, then turned and extended his hand toward the wings where Sophia waited. This was it. The moment of truth. Sophia stepped onto the stage, the emerald dress catching the light as she moved. The applause grew louder. She made her way to the piano, acknowledged the audience with a bow as Julian had taught her, then sat down and adjusted the bench. Julian caught her eye, his expression focused but encouraging. He raised his baton and the orchestra began the opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The familiar notes washed over Sophia as she counted her measures of rest. When her entrance came, her fingers found the keys with certainty. Muscle memory and emotional connection working together as she joined the musical conversation already in progress. The first movement unfolded like a story. Sometimes the orchestra led, sometimes Sophia's piano took center stage. She felt fully present in each moment, aware of Julian's conducting, the orchestra's response, and her own interpretation all flowing together. As the movement reached its conclusion and the final notes faded, Sophia realized she had been so absorbed in the music that she'd forgotten about her nerves, forgotten about the audience, forgotten about everything except the act of playing. The applause that followed reminded her where she was, and she exchanged a quick glance with Julian, who gave her a subtle nod of approval. The second movement began, its lyrical melody allowing Sophia to showcase the emotional depth that Eleanor had first recognized in her playing at Bellini's. This was the movement that had given her the most trouble during rehearsals, not because of technical difficulties, but because it required such vulnerability, such willingness to express feeling through sound. Now, though the music seemed to play itself, flowing from some deep well within her, Sophia thought about her father, who had never lived to see this moment but who had worked extra shifts to pay for her first piano lessons. She thought about Mr. Abello, her childhood teacher who had recognized her talent and pushed her to apply to the conservatory. She thought about all the late nights practicing in her tiny apartment, holding on to a dream even when it seemed impossible. The second movement gave way to the third. With its driving rhythm and technical challenges, Sophia's fingers flew across the keys, finding patterns and melodies that weaved in and out of the orchestra's contributions. This movement was a test of endurance as well as skill, demanding sustained energy and focus until the very end. As the concerto built toward its final climax, Sophia felt a surge of pure joy. This was what she had been born to do, not to blend into the background serving others, but to create something beautiful that served the soul. The final chords resonated through the hall, and then there was a moment of perfect silence before the audience erupted. Sophia stood as the applause washed over her. Julian was smiling broadly now as he gestured for her to take a bow. The orchestra members tapped their bows against their music stands, a musician's sign of respect. In the audience, people were on their feet. Sophia could see Carlo wiping tears from his eyes, Eleanor beaming proudly, Mrs. Wu clapping with unrestrained enthusiasm. After several bows, Julian handed Sophia a bouquet of flowers. The weight of them in her arms made everything feel more real somehow. This wasn't a dream or a fantasy. This was her life now. As she walked off stage, Sophia caught sight of a young girl in the front row, watching her with wide, wonder-filled eyes. Something about the child's expression, a mixture of awe and possibility, reminded Sophia of herself at that age, when music had first captured her heart. In the wings, Julian squeezed her shoulder. "Magnificent," he said simply. "Thank you for taking a chance on me," Sophia replied, still breathless from the performance and the emotion of the moment. "It wasn't a chance," Julian corrected. "It was recognition. Sometimes talent takes a detour, but it always finds its way." Later that night, after the reception had ended and the concert hall had emptied, Sophia returned to the stage alone. The cleaning crew was working in the back of the auditorium, but they didn't mind her sitting quietly at the piano in her emerald gown, now slightly wrinkled from hours of wear. She placed her fingers on the keys but didn't press down. Instead, she simply sat in the silence, absorbing everything that had happened and everything that might come next. Eleanor had mentioned interest from recording studios. Julian had already scheduled her for next season's program. Richard Blackwood had suggested collaborating on a film score. Doors were opening everywhere she looked. Sophia finally allowed herself to play, choosing the piece she had performed that night at Bellini's, her own composition, now refined and expanded with Richard's guidance. The notes filled the nearly empty hall, a private celebration of how far she had come, from waitress to pianist, from background to spotlight, from dreams deferred to dreams fulfilled. As the final notes faded away, Sophia closed the piano lid gently and stood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new music to learn, new heights to reach. But tonight had been everything she could have hoped for, truly a night to remember.